What would you think if I told you that the most profound impact a woman can have on a man's psyche isn't through her beauty, her accomplishments, or even her devotion, but through a single moment of psychological truth that penetrates straight into his unconscious mind and creates an emotional imprint that becomes impossible to erase? There exists within the feminine psyche an untapped reservoir of archetypal power that most women never learn to access, a psychological territory where words become weapons of transformation and silence becomes the canvas upon which desire paints its most vivid masterpieces. This isn't about manipulation or games. This is about understanding the deeper currents of human psychology and learning to navigate them with the wisdom of someone who has done the inner work to know herself completely. The modern woman finds herself trapped in a cultural paradigm that teaches her to diminish her natural psychological power in favor of surface-level attractions and performative behaviors that ultimately repel the very depth of connection she craves. She has been conditioned to believe that vulnerability means emotional overflow, that authenticity requires constant explanation, and that love must be earned through endless giving rather than commanded through magnetic presence. But Carl Jung understood something profound about the human psyche when he wrote about the process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness that requires integrating both the light and shadow aspects of our personality. A woman who has embarked on this journey of self-discovery carries within her an energy that operates on frequencies most people cannot even perceive, let alone resist. The shadow work that Jung spoke of isn't just about acknowledging our darker impulses. It's about recognizing the parts of ourselves we've been taught to suppress or deny. For women, this often includes their natural capacity for psychological dominance, their intuitive understanding of emotional manipulation, and their innate ability to create states of longing and desire through strategic withholding rather than constant giving. When a woman begins to reclaim these disowned aspects of herself, not to become cruel or calculating, but to integrate them into a more complete and powerful version of who she is, something shifts in her energetic signature that affects everyone around her, but particularly the men who encounter her. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and this psychological principle becomes a powerful tool when understood through the lens of feminine attraction. A woman who has mastered her own inner landscape knows how to plant seeds in a man's imagination that bloom long after she has left his presence. She understands that the male psyche is driven by the need to conquer what seems unconquerable, to solve what appears unsolvable, and to possess what remains mysteriously just beyond reach. This isn't about playing hard to get in some superficial sense. This is about becoming so deeply rooted in your own worth that you naturally embody the archetype of the feminine mystery that has captivated masculine consciousness since the beginning of time. The trauma-informed approach to relationships that has become popular in recent years, while valuable in many ways, has created a generation of women who believe that healing means becoming completely open books, sharing every wound and trigger in the name of authenticity. But there is a profound difference between genuine vulnerability and emotional exhibitionism. True vulnerability is a conscious choice made from a place of strength, not an unconscious spillage of unprocessed pain. A woman who has done the deep work of healing her attachment patterns and childhood wounds doesn't need to constantly reference them in her relationships. Instead, she moves through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who has faced her demons and emerged victorious. Seneca understood that true power comes not from the absence of emotion, but from the mastery of emotion. He wrote that anger is temporary madness, And this wisdom applies equally to all the reactive states that can diminish a woman's psychological impact. When a woman learns to feel deeply while responding consciously, when she can be moved by emotion without being controlled by it, she develops an almost supernatural ability to affect others. Her words carry weight because they emerge from stillness rather than chaos. Her silences become pregnant with meaning because they arise from choice rather than fear. Her very presence becomes a statement about what it means to be psychologically integrated and emotionally sovereign. The concept of projection that Jung explored so thoroughly becomes particularly relevant when we consider how men experience attraction to psychologically powerful women. What a man finds irresistible in such a woman is not just her individual qualities, but the way she makes him feel about his own potential for depth and growth. She becomes a mirror for his own unexplored psychological territories, a catalyst for his own individuation process. This is why certain women remain unforgettable long after relationships end. They didn't just occupy space in a man's life. They awakened something in him that he didn't even know existed. The psychology of memory formation reveals that our most vivid recollections are not necessarily of the most dramatic events, but of moments when our emotional and cognitive systems were simultaneously activated in unexpected ways. A woman who understands this principle can create experiences that become neurologically embedded in ways that transcend ordinary attraction. She knows that the brain's dopamine pathways are triggered not by predictable rewards, but by intermittent, unpredictable ones. This is why the woman who is consistently available and eager never achieves the same psychological impact as the one who appears and disappears like a beautiful storm, leaving behind only the memory of how alive everything felt in her presence. The archetypal feminine has always held the power of the oracle, the ability to see and speak truths that others cannot or dare not acknowledge. In ancient cultures, this power was revered and feared in equal measure. The modern woman has largely forgotten this aspect of her inheritance, choosing instead to operate from the safer, but ultimately less powerful territory of agreeableness and people-pleasing. But when a woman reconnects with her oracular nature, when she learns to speak the truths that emerge from her deepest knowing rather than the platitudes that emerge from her social conditioning, she taps into a source of influence that bypasses rational defenses and speaks directly to the soul. Epictetus taught that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control our responses to what happens to us. For the psychologically sophisticated woman, this Stoic principle becomes a foundation for unshakable personal power. She doesn't need external validation because she has cultivated internal worth. She doesn't fear rejection because she has learned that not everyone is capable of appreciating depth. She doesn't chase because she knows that anything worth having will recognize her value and move toward her. This isn't arrogance. It's a natural confidence that emerges from someone who has done the work of knowing herself completely. The concept of the anima that Jung described, the feminine aspect within the male psyche, helps explain why certain women have such a profound impact on men's psychological development. When a man encounters a woman who embodies the integrated feminine, powerful yet receptive, independent yet capable of intimacy, mysterious yet authentic, she activates his anima in ways that create profound internal shifts. She doesn't just attract him, she catalyzes his growth. She doesn't just occupy his thoughts, she reorganizes his entire relationship to what's possible in love and partnership. There are specific words and phrases that, when spoken by a woman who embodies this integrated feminine energy, create what psychologists call state-dependent memories, recollections that are tied not just to the content of what was said, but to the entire emotional and physiological state that was present when the words were heard. These aren't pickup lines or manipulation tactics. They are expressions of psychological truth that emerge naturally from a woman who has cultivated deep self-awareness. When she says something like, "I see something in you that you don't even see in yourself yet," she isn't flattering him. She is speaking from her ability to perceive potential that hasn't yet been actualized. When she observes, "You have a way of making me forget how guarded I usually am," she isn't being vulnerable for strategic purposes. She is acknowledging a genuine effect he has on her carefully constructed psychological defenses. The timing and delivery of such statements matters immensely. They cannot be rehearsed or calculated. They must emerge from authentic moments of recognition and truth. The woman who has done her shadow work recognizes when she is speaking from genuine observation versus when she is performing vulnerability to achieve a desired outcome. The man's unconscious mind, which is far more sophisticated than his conscious awareness, immediately recognizes the difference between authentic depth and manipulative performance. Before we continue exploring the deeper psychological mechanisms at work here, I want to pause and acknowledge something. If you've made it this far in this exploration, you're not just someone looking for quick relationship fixes or surface-level dating advice. You're someone who recognizes that true connection requires depth, that lasting attraction requires authenticity, and that the most profound relationships are built on foundations of mutual psychological growth and understanding. The women in our community aren't interested in games or tricks. They're interested in becoming the most integrated, powerful, and genuinely attractive versions of themselves. If this resonates with you, if you're tired of shallow advice and ready for content that treats you as the intelligent, complex woman you are, then you belong here with us. Subscribe not just to get more videos, but to become part of a community of women who are committed to their own psychological evolution and who understand that the deepest form of attraction comes from authentic personal power. And please, share in the comments below, what's one moment when you felt truly seen by someone? Not flattered or complimented, but genuinely seen for who you are beneath all the social masks we wear. Your stories help all of us understand these deeper patterns of human connection. The neuroscience of attachment reveals that the most powerful bonds are formed not through constant presence or endless reassurance, but through a specific pattern of availability and absence that creates what researchers call intermittent reinforcement. This psychological principle, which operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, explains why some women become absolutely unforgettable while others, despite their best efforts and genuine devotion, fade into the background of men's emotional landscape. The woman who masters this principle doesn't manipulate through games or calculated unavailability. Instead, she naturally embodies the rhythm of depth and withdrawal that mirrors the eternal dance between consciousness and the unconscious mind. Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious reveals that certain archetypal patterns exist within all human beings regardless of culture or era. The archetype of the wise woman, the feminine figure who possesses knowledge that transcends ordinary understanding, appears in every mythology and storytelling tradition throughout history. When a modern woman connects with this archetypal energy within herself, she doesn't just become attractive to individual men. She becomes magnetic to the masculine principle itself. She embodies something that speaks to the deepest layers of masculine psychology, awakening not just desire, but a profound hunger for psychological and spiritual growth. The process of individuation that Jung described involves the integration of opposite forces within the psyche: light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. A woman who has engaged seriously with this process carries within her energy system a completeness that most people spend their entire lives seeking externally. She doesn't need a man to complete her because she has learned to balance her own internal opposites. Paradoxically, this very completeness makes her irresistible to men who are still fragmented, still seeking outside themselves what can only be found through inner work. She becomes a living example of what psychological wholeness looks like, and her mere presence challenges men to embark on their own journey toward integration. The shadow work that is essential to this process involves acknowledging and integrating the parts of ourselves that we've been taught to deny or suppress. For many women, this includes their capacity for strategic thinking, their natural understanding of power dynamics, and their ability to create emotional states in others through conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. When a woman reclaims these disowned aspects of herself, she gains access to a much fuller range of expression and influence. She can be genuinely warm and caring while also being psychologically formidable. She can be authentically vulnerable while maintaining clear boundaries. She can love deeply while never losing herself in the process. The specific words that create lasting impact emerge from this place of integration. When a woman who has done this deep work says something like, "I'm not used to meeting someone who can match my intensity," she isn't trying to inflate his ego or manipulate his self-perception. She is acknowledging a genuine recognition of someone who operates on her wavelength. When she observes, "There's something about the way you look at me that makes me want to lower all my defenses," she isn't performing vulnerability as a seduction technique. She is describing an authentic internal response to his energy. These statements become unforgettable precisely because they emerge from truth rather than strategy. The masculine psyche, according to Jung's research into gender psychology, is particularly drawn to what he called the eternal feminine, not the stereotypical feminine of cultural conditioning, but the archetypal feminine that represents intuition, depth, mystery, and transformative power. A woman who embodies this energy doesn't need to try to be mysterious. Mystery emerges naturally from the depths of her self-knowledge. She doesn't need to perform intensity. Intensity flows naturally from her connection to her own emotional truth. She doesn't need to create artificial scarcity. Her authentic selectivity makes her naturally rare. The trauma-informed understanding of relationships that has become prevalent in recent decades, while offering valuable insights into healing patterns, has sometimes created a therapeutic culture that mistakes emotional processing for emotional mastery. The woman who truly embodies psychological power has moved beyond the need to constantly reference her wounds or explain her triggers. She has done the work of healing not so she can endlessly discuss her healing process, but so she can move through the world from a place of strength rather than reactivity. Her vulnerability, when she chooses to express it, comes from overflow rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. Marcus Aurelius wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life, but that this little must come from within, from your own way of thinking. This Stoic wisdom becomes profoundly relevant for women who want to create lasting impact in their relationships. The woman who has cultivated internal contentment doesn't need constant external validation. She doesn't need to be chosen by everyone because she has chosen herself. She doesn't fear being alone because she has learned to enjoy her own company. This internal foundation creates an energy that is simultaneously independent and capable of deep intimacy, a combination that proves irresistible to psychologically mature men. The concept of projection that Jung explored helps explain why certain encounters between men and women create such profound and lasting impressions. When a man meets a woman who embodies integrated feminine power, he often projects onto her his own undeveloped potential for depth and growth. She becomes a symbol of everything he could become if he committed to his own psychological development. This is why such women are remembered not just as romantic interests, but as catalysts for personal transformation. They don't just inspire desire, they inspire evolution. The deepest psychological truth about human memory is that we remember most vividly not what people did to us or for us, but how they made us feel about ourselves and about life itself. A woman who understands this principle operates from an entirely different paradigm than one who believes attraction is built through constant giving, endless availability, or impressive performance. She knows that the most lasting impact comes from creating moments of profound internal shift, experiences that reorganize a person's relationship to their own potential and possibilities. When she speaks, her words carry the power to awaken dormant aspects of personality that may have been sleeping for years or even decades. The process of becoming this kind of woman requires what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period of deep introspection and shadow integration that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. She must face the parts of herself that she has been taught to deny. Her capacity for psychological dominance, her natural understanding of emotional manipulation, her ability to create and withdraw intimacy strategically. But rather than using these discoveries to become calculating or cruel, she integrates them into a more complete and powerful version of authentic selfhood. She becomes dangerous not because she seeks to harm, but because she refuses to diminish herself for the comfort of others. The words that create the most lasting psychological impact are those that acknowledge hidden truths about the person hearing them. When a woman who has done her own deep work looks at a man and says something like, "You're afraid of how much you could actually feel if you let yourself," she isn't trying to wound him or create insecurity. She is speaking from her ability to perceive the gap between who he is and who he could become. These observations land with such force because they emerge from genuine sight rather than generic flattery. They reveal rather than conceal. They challenge rather than comfort. Seneca taught that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. For the psychologically sophisticated woman, this translates into the courage to speak truth even when it might be rejected, to maintain boundaries even when it might cause conflict, and to remain authentic even when inauthenticity would be more socially acceptable. She understands that the alternative to this courage is a life of diminished impact and shallow connections. She would rather be occasionally rejected for who she truly is than constantly accepted for who she pretends to be. The neuroscience of desire reveals that attraction operates through a complex interplay of mystery and revelation, distance and closeness, challenge and comfort. The woman who creates lasting psychological impact instinctively understands this rhythm. She reveals herself gradually, in layers, allowing each disclosure to create deeper intimacy while maintaining enough mystery to keep growth and discovery possible. She is present enough to create genuine connection, but maintains enough psychological independence to avoid the suffocating intensity that often kills desire in its early stages. The specific phrases that become unforgettable are those that create what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, moments when our existing beliefs about ourselves are challenged by new information. When a psychologically powerful woman says, "I can see you trying to figure me out," and "I like watching you try," she creates a moment of pleasant confusion that stays active in his mind long after the conversation ends. When she observes, "You make me want to trust again," which terrifies and excites me in equal measure, she reveals a complexity of internal response that defies simple categorization. These statements work not because they flatter or manipulate, but because they acknowledge the full spectrum of human psychological experience. The integration of Stoic philosophy with Jungian psychology creates a powerful framework for feminine empowerment that goes far beyond surface-level attraction techniques. The woman who embodies this integration doesn't need to choose between strength and softness, independence and intimacy, mystery and authenticity. She learns to hold seeming contradictions in creative tension, becoming more complete and therefore more compelling than someone who has only developed one aspect of their personality. She can be simultaneously vulnerable and invulnerable, available and elusive, caring and detached. The collective unconscious that Jung described contains archetypal patterns that exist across all cultures and time periods. The figure of the wise woman, the feminine principle that possesses transformative knowledge, appears in every mythological system throughout human history. When a modern woman connects consciously with this archetypal energy, she gains access to a source of power and influence that transcends individual personality. She doesn't just become attractive to specific men. She becomes magnetic to the masculine principle itself, awakening in men a recognition of something they have been seeking without knowing what it was. This journey towards psychological integration and authentic power is not easy or quick. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves and others. It demands that we release the safety of people-pleasing and embrace the uncertainty of authentic self-expression. It asks us to develop the courage to be disliked by some in order to be genuinely loved by others. But for women who are willing to undertake this journey, the rewards extend far beyond romantic relationships. They become more creative, more intuitive, more emotionally resilient, and more capable of creating the life they truly want rather than the life others expect them to want. As we reach the end of this exploration together, I want you to know that every woman who has watched this entire journey is already demonstrating the psychological sophistication and commitment to growth that sets her apart from the majority who are satisfied with surface-level solutions. You are part of a community of women who understand that true attraction comes from authentic power, that lasting connections require psychological depth, and that the most profound relationships are built on foundations of mutual growth and transformation. If this content has sparked recognition, inspiration, or even productive discomfort in you, please subscribe and join us as we continue exploring these deeper territories of human psychology and feminine empowerment. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. What's one truth about yourself that you've been afraid to acknowledge or express? What aspect of your psychological shadow are you ready to integrate? Your honesty and vulnerability help create the kind of authentic community where real growth becomes possible. Together, we can reclaim the power that was always ours and create relationships that honor the full depth of who we are.